miles on either side of Sheringham, the Sheringham Lighthouse. If you go more than, say, 5 or 6 nautical miles or 10 past Sheringham, there has to be a highly compelling reason to do it, because you will get a geographic lift. And if you tack early,
because it turns north.
Yeah, the land bends, and people that go out and do that race, they think it's a straight tube, but it isn't.
No,
it bends,
yeah.
and the breeze follows it around, and also the breeze is affected by the late sunrise, the late sunset. And so what happens is, almost always in a westerly, the breeze starts going north. The breeze goes north on the north side of the strait. It follows the sundown, and it follows the bend of the land.
Okay.
And the breeze goes south or southeast on this American side. So you get lifted as you come across, and you get lifted, and you get lifted until the classic westerly, which is what it's going to be, would be you'd cross about Sheringham. Around Sheringham Light, which is what, 15 miles or 20 miles nautical miles west of Race Passage.
Okay.
You come across, and it will look like your normal.
You start creaking off, or
no, never. No. Close hold all the way over, and you're going to come out in a classic westerly around Pillar Point.
Okay.
And Pillar Point's the big kind of box
Is it
hill.
Pillar Point on US
Pillar
side?
Point's on the U.S. side, and it marks the southern end of the bay that the Strait of Juan de Fuca races in.
Okay.
So there's this big, the Elwha River comes out on the west or on the east side of that, and you'll be the normal approach would be the boat is pointing right for Pillar Point on a westerly, classic westerly, and you'll get lifted, and you'll get to the American side, and there will be a point on the American side where you're like, I'm late, or we're doing really good, and then you get a header. And when you get that header, that's the line where the westerly is being bounced off of the Olympics, and it's now a southwesterly.
Oh.
And if you tack on that, if you dig into it a little bit and you tack on that, now you're going to take advantage of a lift on the southern side of the race course. And so you take the header until you get to you take the lift until you get the header. You dig into it for, however it feels. Usually it's maybe 2 miles, but until you're like, well, we can't live here. And you tack, and you get lifted along the American shore on a port tack lift. And now you see all these guys that sailed way up on the Canadian shore, and they're coming across on this lift, but they can never get to you because you're on this left-hand lift. And you watch for that. The winning move on the way out is to look for the breeze to move south, like southwesterly on the American side.
And then tack into that once you're deep enough.
Until you're deep enough and you feel good about it. Then you tack into that. You kind of work your way until it gets weird. It gets the evening. Every time you get headed, when you come out off of the American shore, go back in, dig back into the southerly movement, and you dig your way out. And you work your way up there, and you're working your way up as you go up to Cape Flattery. You start off like a couple miles, maybe 3 miles offshore, off where the short course boat is, and then as you get farther up the track, up towards Neah Bay, your tacks are getting longer, but you're never going more than 2 or 3 miles offshore.
Okay.
And but then
is it because you can lose this lift of Olympic Mountains?
And there's really weird shifts. The closer you get to Neah Bay, the land drops and then it rises again, and there's really weird shifts there. The breeze, what happens is you've got a southwesterly coming around Neah Bay, you've got a northwesterly coming down the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and it's bouncing off the Olympics, and so you get these really weird, it's breezy, but there'd be a 35-degree wind shift, and you're like, holy shit, how did that happen, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to be in phase with that stuff.
Okay.
And that's why sometimes taking the long, lazy tacks out for a couple miles till it gets weird and come back in. You have to be super, super careful when you're coming into Neah Bay. If it's an ebb, you can get set to the north. Now it's going to be windy, so it may not affect you, but there's a massive amount of ebb. When it's ebbing, the ebb is going to send you to the north, and you could be sent to Pachina Point, and you can never get back if it's light. So you need to be super careful of that you don't get set past the mark if it's an ebb. If it's a flood, you could work your way out past Wada Island, which is where the mark is, and still not be overstood enough if it's a flood, because it's going to be like 3 or 4 knots flooding. But if it's 3 knots ebbing or 2 knots ebbing there, you could. I've seen boats, they're like overstood coming into the mark, and all of a sudden off they go. So you need to be really careful, and that's when you're using your GPS and you're using marks on the shore, and you're looking at how you're ranging. So then, when you come around the mark, so let's assume you're around the mark, and if it's windy, you're going to be around the mark at G109, you're going to be around the mark at dinner time. Or maybe a little later than that, but maybe like dinner time, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. Lights will still be on. That's when you eat dinner, because it's going to be a shit fight coming home. It's going to be hand-to-hand combat. It's Swiftsure is won at night, and Swiftsure is won hand-to-hand combat. The last half of Swiftsure is when you win that race. Doesn't matter when it's windy, when it's light, you win Swiftsure or you lose Swiftsure between Sheringham Lighthouse and the finish line, coming home. More wins have been pissed away, and more losses have been turned into wins because people fight hard there. So, normal approach, you come around, you can't bear down because there's a gravel boulder field, there's a big boulder field coming around the mark. It's just like rum line, generally speaking, is Port Pole rum line. You're heading for the barn. That's when you have to make decisions.
And barn is on
the barn is the finish. You're heading for the barn. You're heading home. You have to, if it's a westerly, what you want to do is pay attention to all the weather actualities and look at what's actually happening on the race course. You have to be paying attention to what is happening to the boats in race passage. It's critical, because if you are coming down there, you're coming home, you're heading for the finish, and you're heading for Sheringham Lighthouse, and you're coming home, and you're like, we're right rum line, we're going 12 knots right to the finish. And you look at the boat speed of the boats that are in the short course on the tracker, and it shows them like going 0.2 when you go around, like on the other side of race passage. What it means is either
race passage, you mean the middle of something?
Yeah, race passage, like just race passage is 9 miles. 10 miles west of Victoria, and it's where the lighthouse is, and coming through there. Race passage is like the critical
between race rocks and the
land. That's race passage. If you really need to have someone checking constantly you want to check what the boat speed is, the boat speeds of the boats that are coming home and going through race passage in the short course, because it'll tell you whether there's wind or not. Right? So if there's no wind, then you have to make decisions. Well, maybe we'll go around. Maybe we'll do something different. Maybe we'll jibe a couple of times and stay in the pressure. The pressure dies from the shores out into the middle. The most pressure in a westerly will be in the middle. It will die on the shores as the evening goes by. I don't think it's going to die this weekend, but I think it's going to stay pressured up. But I favor in the middle coming home, which is rum line. If the shores are not rum line, America and Canada are not rum line. And if it's breezy, you guys are going to be, sailing. It's going to take you guys, 18 hours or something to do the race. So it's not even an issue like what it's going to do when it gets dark and the wind goes weird. So you sail in there. If it's windy, really important thing. There's a bay that's west of Race Passage. Between Sook Harbor and Race Passage. It's called Betcher Bay. And it's the approaches... It's the western approaches to Race Passage. If it's windy, the wind compresses there. It's a geographical compression, and it's also the way Vancouver Island twists. It gets really windy there, and it happens like that. You need to be, when you're coming into Betcher Bay, you go, okay, it's going to get breezy. Maybe we're going to, let's make sure the number 3 is teed up in the feeder. You should always have your head sail teed up in the feeder in case, you guys are roller furling, but you should always be ready. In case it gets breezy, let's douse. Or if we got to do, if you have to jibe through Race Passage, which you may have to do, You go, well, let's do a chicken jibe. There's no shame in that. Douse, jibe, head sail jibe, and reset if you have to do that. There's no shame in that. And I've seen people lose races because like, oh, we've got the best crew in the world, and you don't stick the jibe, and then you can spend 15 minutes lying to your side in race passage and lose the race. When you come through race passage, you need to have eyes outside the boat. What's going on in front of us? Are boats moving? Are the lights moving or they're not? You come through the race, you look down the track. It is very rare that you don't do the great circle to get to the finish. The great circle would be sail until pretty much Victoria. The lights of the finish line are kind of sort of on your port beam, like maybe all the way, but then you jibe. If you jibe too early, even if it's super windy, it probably doesn't matter. But if it's 15 knots and gusty and weird, I do a great circle because the breeze picks up over Royal Roads, and that's where the Navy base is. It's Esquimalt, and it gets squirrely on the I guess it's the southeast side of Royal Roads is Esquimalt. It gets weird, and if you get too close in there, even if it's windy, you can get suckered into doing things you'll never want to do. And then the last piece is someone needs to pay critical attention to two pieces. One is where the cruise ships are all the time. You need to listen to where the cruise ships are because there's going to be a ton of them out there this weekend. And two, you need to pay attention to how you're tracking on the finish line. That finish line, there's giant amounts of current that run from the north to the east to the west at the finish line. And if you people are like, okay, we're easy on it, holy shit, we need to put a head sail up to get to the finish line because they get set super far towards Discovery Island. So and so those were classic approaches in a westerly. One other thing is people don't think that the start doesn't matter. It matters in this race as much as any start in any race. They're like, oh, it's 100 miles and blah, blah, blah. I have never seen anybody win this race, hyperbole aside, if they don't get off the line clean. Watch, and if you want to watch if you want to watch one of the fast boats start first, okay, watch Glory. If you don't know what else to do, if you have no idea, what are we going to do? Watch where Glory goes off the start line. And I'd be willing to bet that if, in these conditions for this race, the classic approach would be, long, lazy tacks in towards Royal Roads. And I haven't seen the currents, but I think it's against you. So if it's against you, you want to get into Royal Roads and get as far... Not all the way to the beach, but watch the headers and then get into Royal Roads and do a long starboard approach into race passage underneath Royal Roads, and you'll get away. You're not getting into an eddy. You're getting into worse bad, and you spend the minimal amount of time in worse bad.
Fighting, yeah. Okay.
And that would be that's a classic westerly, and have fun and don't break anything.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good luck.
Yeah. I record